Did China just hit America's biggest weakness? Everyone expected China to hit back, but no one thought they would go straight for America's farms. The U.S. just raised tariffs on Chinese goods, and Washington knew retaliation was coming. But instead of targeting technology, manufacturing, or finance, China went after something unexpected: American agriculture. Why does this matter? Because agriculture isn't just another industry. It's one of America's biggest economic weapons. The U.S. exports more than $150 billion in agricultural goods every year, and China has been one of its largest customers. Now, that door is closing fast. This isn't just about money. It's about pressure. China isn't simply hurting the U.S. economy. It's striking at the heart of rural America. Why? Because that's where Donald Trump's strongest support base is. If farmers start feeling the economic pain, political pressure shifts, and that's exactly what China wants. The real question now is this just the opening move? Or is China setting the stage for a full-scale trade war that the U.S. can't afford to win? If there's one thing that makes American agriculture powerful, it's exports, and China has just put that entire system at risk. Why this is a major blow to the U.S. The U.S. doesn't just feed itself, it feeds the world. Over 20% of all crops and meat grown in America are sold internationally, and until now, China was one of the biggest buyers. Beijing knows exactly where to strike. Soybeans. The U.S. sends tens of millions of tons of soybeans to China every year. Corn, beef, pork, these are all major American exports now on the chopping block. If those sales disappear, farmers don't just lose profits, they lose entire markets. And here's where it gets worse. Crops can't sit in storage forever. If China stops buying, supply builds up, prices crash, and farmers suffer immediate losses. This isn't just a temporary disruption. It's a long-term strategy. China isn't just cutting U.S. imports. It's ensuring that America's top trade weapon, agriculture, loses its global influence. So, does the U.S. have a backup plan? Or did China just expose one of the biggest weaknesses in the American economy? China already has backup suppliers. If the U.S. assumes China still needs its crops, it might be in for a rude awakening. China has spent years securing alternative suppliers, and now they're moving fast. Brazil and Argentina are already stepping in to replace American soybeans. Russia is increasing its corn exports to China. As for meat, China has been building up its pork and beef supplies for years. This isn't the 2018 trade war when China still relied heavily on U.S. soybeans and grains. Beijing has learned from the past and has been preparing for this moment. The biggest danger for U.S. farmers is that once China fully transitions to other suppliers, those contracts don't come back overnight. Brazil, Argentina, and Russia are more than willing to take that business permanently. If China shifts away from American agriculture, it could stay that way indefinitely, losing a tech deal. A company can pivot. Losing car sales, automakers can offer discounts or redesign models. But losing agricultural exports, that's a disaster. Crops don't wait. Farmers can't pause a harvest. If China stops buying, the damage is instant. Farmers still have to sell, and without buyers, prices plummet. Supply chains aren't built to shift overnight. When a major buyer like China disappears, the entire agricultural industry takes a hit. The ripple effect. A nationwide crisis, and the fallout doesn't stop at the farm. A supply glut doesn't just hurt exporters, it affects all farmers. If prices collapse, even those who weren't selling to China will suffer. Farms will shut down. Jobs will be lost. Entire rural economies will take the hit first. This is why China's move is more damaging than any tariff war on tech or manufacturing. It's not just about losing sales. It's about breaking an industry that takes years to rebuild. So, what can the U.S. do to counter this? Did China just find America's most vulnerable economic pressure point? If China is willing to cut off billions in U.S. agricultural imports, what's next? Because this may not stop with soybeans and corn. What could China target next? If China is willing to escalate, there are other industries in its crosshairs. One major target could be energy exports. China still buys U.S. liquefied natural gas, LNG, and crude oil. If that trade gets cut, energy markets would feel the pressure. Another vulnerable sector? Aircraft deals. Boeing relies heavily on Chinese buyers. A pullback in aircraft purchases could seriously hurt the U.S. aerospace industry. Then there's tech components. China still imports semiconductors and high-end machinery from the U.S. If Beijing cuts those imports, it would hit major American tech companies hard. China's strategy is clear: make the trade war hurt in places that Washington can't afford to ignore. If agriculture doesn't force the U.S. to rethink its tariffs, Beijing has other economic weapons ready to go. The bigger question now is, how far is China willing to push before it starts feeling the pain? 2. The risks for China. Escalating a trade war is easy, but winning one is a different story. Right now, the U.S. is feeling the pain, but how much more can it take? Farmers are running out of buyers, and with China shifting to Brazil and Argentina, U.S. crops are stacking up with no market. This isn't just a farm crisis, it's an economic chain reaction. Industries connected to agriculture, shipping, storage, and processing are already seeing the slowdown. If Washington doesn't step in, local economies that rely on agricultural exports could start breaking down. But here's where China might have miscalculated. While Beijing has secured alternative suppliers, food security is still a risk. Relying too heavily on Brazil and Argentina comes with uncertainty. Bad harvests or supply chain disruptions could leave China exposed. Even with its new trade deals, China still imports massive amounts of soybeans, corn, and meat. If global markets tighten, prices could spike and China might face its own crisis. Another factor, global trade dynamics. If China keeps escalating, other major economies could start siding with the U.S. Would Beijing risk turning a trade dispute into a full-scale economic battle? This move puts pressure on the U.S., but is China also walking a fine line? If this strategy backfires, does Beijing have a fallback plan? Or is China gambling on a risk it can't afford? A turning point in global trade. At this point, neither side is stepping back. And now, it's no longer just about exports. The trade war is turning into something much bigger, an all-out economic battle with global consequences. What's happening right now? China is cutting off U.S. suppliers and securing long-term deals with Brazil, Argentina, and Russia. The U.S. is trying to push China into a corner, but in doing so, it's putting its own industries at risk. Other nations are watching closely. If China successfully replaces the U.S., more countries might follow, shifting global trade patterns permanently. This is a turning point. If China successfully restructures its import strategy, this isn't just a temporary economic hit for the U.S., it's permanent. Losing a major buyer like China means losing leverage in global trade negotiations. The real war isn't about tariffs anymore, it's about control over future supply chains. And at this point, it's not just about who's winning, it's about who can afford to keep fighting. China has made its move. The U.S. isn't backing down. But what's next? If the U.S. stays firm, will China escalate even further? And if China permanently replaces U.S. agriculture, will Washington be forced to rethink its entire trade strategy? The trade war is far from over, and now the stakes are higher than ever.